Okay, so we are recording. This will be good for me though, because I know that I have a tendency to go a tiny bit long, Rachel. And you were very good. I remember on one of the episodes that I was on your show, where I don't even remember how you said it, but you were very kind in letting me know you like to kind of keep it with a 3 in front of the, 30 something, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We can't go into 40, but we can go to 39 if we need to.
And I think we
So,
may have. I think we may have in one of
yeah,
my.
we pushed it. We always push it in our conversations.
Exactly. So we both have a deadline tonight. So this is kind of exciting.
Yes, perfect. It's perfect. It holds us accountable.
Right. So one of my all-time favorite guests to have on the virtual couch is back. Rachel Nielson, thanks for coming back on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And you're one of my all-time favorite guests on 3 and 30.
Well,
Feeling is mutual.
Very kind. And I want to say this on my podcast too, which I think is a lot of fun. We recorded the 2 episodes I've done on your podcast back to back. And
yes.
I think you told the story, I believe, in the second one we did, or maybe when you re-aired it.
Yes.
But it was so fun because we took about a 1-minute break, and then you got back on and said, man, it feels like it was just yesterday, or
No, you said that. I said, welcome back. It was so great. It's great to have you back on my show. And you said, it feels like just yesterday we did this. And then I busted up laughing and we had to start over.
So that was like one of my favorite things of all time. So that was a lot of fun. So, but thanks for coming on. I really am grateful for the topic that you would like to cover today, because this is something I really haven't talked about. I did an episode a long time ago on why it's not the greatest idea to lie to your therapist, but I've never done an episode on how to pick a therapist. So let's dive right in. And so, and you have so many things that I wanted to talk to you about. Why was this one that's important to you?
Well, I get asked this question all the time by women who listen to my show, because I talk very openly about the way that counseling and therapy has blessed my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so they know that I'm like a safe person to ask, so how do you even find a good therapist? And it's a great question, because it's like, do you just randomly start Googling? Do you just call the first one that comes up? And so it's something I've thought about covering on my show. I haven't yet. And then I just thought, how cool would it be to have this conversation with a therapist and get your thoughts as well on how to find a great match for a therapist.
Love that, because I mean, there's even a lot going on for the therapist as well in trying to match up or meet the needs of the client. And there's a lot of data. And I thought maybe I could just start out with this, and I want to go right back to you. But as therapists, I went and looked this up, because we always hide behind this research that nobody can ever go find. But I did find it, and it was done by a task force by the American Psychological Association Society of Clinical Psychology, which says that they found that the therapy relationship makes substantial and consistent contributions to psychotherapy, the psychotherapy outcome independent of the specific type of treatment, which basically saying that the relationship between the client and the therapist is equally, if not more important than even the modality that the therapist uses. And I think that's significant.
Yeah, I think it is too, but I totally believe it. That's really interesting. So over the course of the last 8 years, I've seen 3 different therapists, and they all had completely different personalities, and they all did different modalities of therapy. And I've loved that I've had the different experiences and the different takes with these, they've all added value to my life in totally different ways.
Yeah.
But I've had a good relationship with all 3, and it was a match, even though they had different personalities. So I feel very passionately about therapy.
How did you find them then? So it is interesting, 3 different therapists with different modalities, and you did have a match. And maybe we start with, have you ever had a situation where you haven't necessarily felt a match with a therapist?
The first time I ever tried it, this was prior to having children, and I just recognized that I wasn't dealing with stress very well, a lot of negative thoughts. I was probably struggling with some real depression, though I didn't label it that way. And so it was really scary for me to admit that I wanted to go to counseling. I just called my insurance and did the one that they recommended, and it wasn't a fit personality-wise. And so I just kind of wrote off therapy. Like, I'm like, oh, see, it didn't work. So I saw her a few times. We just never really matched. She was very guarded with what she would share with me about herself. And that was hard for me. Like, she wanted me to pour my guts out and share all about my personal life, but she wouldn't even answer when I'd say, like, how was your weekend? She'd say, well, this isn't about me. And I couldn't like share when I
Yeah.
didn't feel like I was getting anything back.
Well, and
And so,
that's a great way to even, as a therapist, I know there are the person-centered therapy, client-centered therapy. I mean, there are some modalities where it's kind of empowering to be able to share some of those things with your client. And then there's
oh,
others where they say, why is it important that you know about my weekend? And I feel like that could be super annoying if it was somebody who wanted to feel that connection.
yeah, and it's very much my personality that I want to know people, and I love to share my heart, but I totally value hearing their heart. I learn just as much from hearing their experiences, and obviously as a therapist you wouldn't want to take over
Right.
the but when my therapists have shared stuff from their life that has applied, or I feel much more deeply known and I feel more trust for them
Yeah.
because they've shared a little bit. And so I have found that in my therapist sense, in varying degrees. But that first one was just, she was just pretty cold and no, we're not going there. And so I thought, oh, that's how all therapists are. This
Right.
isn't for me. This wasn't that helpful. And I just kind of struggled for the next probably 5 years,
Oh,
thinking like knowing I probably could use some help, but thinking like therapy's not it
right.
because
That was my experience. Yeah.
this one person wasn't a great fit. So that's like my first tip for anybody listening is if you try a therapist and it's not a great fit, do not give up. Try some different therapists until you
Right.
find a great fit.
And now I was already excited to have you on, but now I'm even more excited about this, especially with you, with your experience from that side of the couch, right? And mine in my chair, because I've had those, I'm like you, I'm not going to make it about me, but if somebody asks me a question, I mean, I do feel like that's rapport building or there's some empathy that you can share there. But I have had clients before where I've almost wanted to share something and it's been rare, but where they've said, I don't really want to know anything about you. And it's
Interesting.
okay, no problem. So I mean, that is interesting to know that there are some who would probably have found that woman a great fit.
Yes. And
Yeah.
my therapist now, who I love, she will always say to me, is it okay if I share
Yeah.
something? And of course, but she does always ask and she wants to know what I want before she shares, which I think is great
It is,
for a
and
therapist.
and I do know that a lot of times when one of the questions in my intake paperwork is, "Have you been to therapy before? And if so, what was that experience like?" And I know
Mm,
from a therapist standpoint, I want to know if they couldn't stand the empty chair technique, and that's my go-to. Where we're gonna, which is not, by the way. But then I know that that's probably not what I'm going to lead with. And so I enjoy that part of the paperwork. But I will find often that one of the things that does turn people off, um, your experience, like you're sharing there, but also I've had people say all they did was talk about themselves. And so,
mm,
and so that is interesting. You see both sides of the coin there.
yeah. And from a therapist's perspective, like if the client isn't feeling it, like do you appreciate them just saying that, or how would they say that in a respectful way so that they could move on?
This is great. This is what gets so difficult because I know as part of my kind of opening thoughts, I do like to share that, hey, I need to be, I need you to feel like you can open up, and the faster or the more you can open up, the more I can help you. And then I'll acknowledge, I know that that can be difficult, but if you don't feel like there's a fit here, then that's where I say, hey, I just want you to get help. And so I will not be offended. That's part of the job. And if anything, it shows a lot of strength. So that's one of the things I like to say.
Yeah,
And
and if someone out there is listening and their therapist has not said that to them,
right.
listen to Tony. Like, it shows a lot of strength if you can just acknowledge and say, "Hey, this isn't a great fit, but thank you so much for your time and the tools that you've given me."
Well, it really does.
And
And because I'm thinking right now about one client that I just have absolutely loved working with. And this is a person who had some, just for the sake of kind of generic, men issues. And so she said, I really do want to try a male therapist because I feel like that might be part of the challenge that I'm having. And so I really appreciated that. But we've always kind of been at first when we met, there was this, hey, if this is too much because of some of the things she was processing, then man, I just want her to get help. And so
hmm
I'm grateful that I was the one that she said, let's try this. But if it didn't work, then I totally understand.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after about 5 years, then you finally said, okay, I gotta try this again.
Yeah, I got to a really desperate place, which it was an eating disorder, which was what I had the 5 years previous, I was recognizing that I was using food to either under eating or binge eating to deal with my stress and emotions. And that's why I originally had gone.
Mm.
But then over 5 years and becoming a mother and all of the added change and stress, it got to a point that I could no longer deny that I needed help.
Okay.
And so I feel like it was like more out in desperation that I tried again. And so what I did this time was I had a friend who had told me about intuitive eating. Well, I had a friend who opened up to me that she had had an eating disorder. I think she kind of sensed that there was something going on for me. And so she just said, hey, when I was in college, I had an eating disorder. We didn't talk about the fact that I was struggling with it. She just
Okay.
started talking. And then she said, and I learned about this intuitive eating, and she told me all about it. So then that night I Googled intuitive eating counselor Denver.
Okay.
That's where I was living at the time. So I had like a phrase to come from. So it wasn't like I was just like Googling therapists in Denver, which would be a lot.
Yes.
So I think that that's a strategy if there's something that you are specifically struggling with, or a type of therapy that you've heard of that you might want to try, to Google your area and then the type of therapist. And then there was about probably 7 that came up, and I just looked at each of their websites and just tried to get a feel. And I could tell right away this one woman might be a good fit, and she had the option for like a 15-minute phone call to just get to know her.
Yeah.
And so we did that, and I could just tell it was a good match. And so I gave it a go, and it was life-changing. So I went and I did one-on-one with her, and then I did a small group. It was DBT that they
Yeah.
did there,
Perfect. Yeah.
which was great. So I did a small group once a week, and I did one-on-one with her once a week for about 9 months. And then I was good. Like I was just doing so much better. And we were moving. But I was in a place that even if we weren't moving, I think I would have been okay to stop. Like, because other people have asked me before, how do you know when it's going to stop? Like,
Right.
is it never
Exactly.
ending? Like, because that's an expense if it's never
Yes.
ending, and are you roped into it? And I just told people, this has been my experience with all 3 of the counselors. Like there comes a point where you kind of run out of stuff to talk about. Like
Sure.
you just, every week you're kind of like, actually I'm pretty good.
Yeah.
And you don't have as much to talk about anymore. And that's a good sign that you're ready to stop and go out and try it and live. And so I did that, and I was good for probably about a year. And then we had moved, and I found that I was
Can I ask
seeing,
you real quick,
yes,
before
yeah.
we move past the one in Denver, what was it that was different about her that you liked? What felt right?
I think she was warmer and more open with me for sure.
Okay.
I also think that I was ready.
Mm.
And I think
Yeah.
that's a huge
No, it is.
component. Like I was just ready to do the work, and it was almost like I was going to overlook anything that maybe wasn't perfect with her personality or whatever, because I desperately wanted the help. I was no longer like, I guess I should. And so my mindset was a lot better, and I went in hungry for help and just like took all the notes and did all the homework and showed up and did the work, and completely changed my life.
I like what you're. Oh, go ahead. Finish that.
Just like when I look back and think about who I was before I started with her and to who I am now, I'm a very different person in all good ways. So
Right.
I really say therapy has changed me. It has.
I love that. As a therapist, of course, I love that. And as a friend, I'm grateful for that. I really appreciate you saying too that you felt like you were ready to do the work. And I feel like as a therapist, I'm aware that there are times that people come in and feeling like wanting to do the work can feel overwhelming. So,
Mm-hmm.
if someone is feeling, if they feel right now when they're hearing this, that they feel like, well, I don't know, I just want to go in and try it, or I want to be heard, or that's perfectly okay. But I will tell you that, man, as a therapist, when somebody is saying, all right, I'm ready, that is, it really accelerates the process. I love using humor in therapy, I can't lie. And so a lot of times when somebody is saying that, or they've done a little bit of reading, or they've done a little bit of background work, or, I love to say, hey, you just saved us 2 sessions right there. That's because they
Oh,
really have.
yes. Oh, or like several months of sessions,
Yeah.
just if you want it to be an accelerated experience where you're worried about the investment
Yeah.
or the time, like come in ready and then do it. Whatever your therapist asks you to work on that week, do it. Take notes during your sessions, read over them, talk to
Yeah.
your friends or spouse about what you're learning and how you're changing, and you will see rapid change if you go into therapy that way. And that's one reason why I really believe that the investment in therapy is good, because when you are paying for high quality help, you take it seriously and you do
Yeah.
the work. And that's been my experience.
Okay. Let me be the super vulnerable therapist here for a little bit. I mean, again, I'm really excited that we're talking about this now. The more we get into this, one of the things that I feel like I have overcorrected on is that where you say, "Is there an end to therapy?" And I feel like I'm almost hyper aware of that, and I don't want someone to feel, because I feel like that therapy does have a bit of a bad name for some, where they feel like their therapist is just going to keep them coming forever and ever because it's this guaranteed, weekly or bi-monthly paycheck. And
Mm-hmm.
so I remember the first time I found a booking software program for therapists online where, I realized I was saying, "Hey, I'll create your account and you set up the appointments with whatever works for you." Because I wanted people to feel so much like I'm not trying to push you for therapy. But it's interesting because what I found out is that but people get busy, or they can be
Mm-hmm.
a little bit overwhelmed at times, and then all of a sudden they don't have a regular schedule set up, and so then oftentimes I was doing more just catch up or more maintenance, and we weren't necessarily
Yeah.
doing a lot of growth. So that's been a challenge to try and say, all right, I would love to see you every week for a little while, then we'll move to every other week, and maybe we move to monthly or that sort of thing.
Yeah. And I think it's totally appropriate too, as the professional, to say, because I've had a counselor say to me, we did my intake, we talked
Mhm.
about everything that was going on. And then she said, "Okay, I think that we should meet weekly for this long and
Yeah.
then we'll see." And she said, she was just straightforward about her time. She's like, "I have a very full like caseload right now, and I need you to commit. Like this work, it's not just going to be a one and done. Like if you want to do this work, I need you to commit to 3 months." But it didn't feel salesy at all.
Sure.
It was like a treatment plan. And I
Yes.
really liked her. This is my current therapist that I've actually seen for the last 3 years. That's how much I like her.
Perfect.
But now we just see each other I just see her once a month for kind of maintenance.
Yeah.
But when she initially started with me, she kind of said up front, "This is what you need. And if you're ready to commit to that, then I can take you on as a client." So I wouldn't, if a therapist is saying it that way, I wouldn't see it as a red flag.
Right.
Trust your gut. And it's not like she had me pay up front.
Yeah.
If at any point I had wanted to cancel because we weren't a good fit, she couldn't have held me to that. But she was just
Absolutely.
asking up front for me to take it seriously, basically, and to give it the time that it deserved. And I'm so glad I did.
Right. And no, that's perfect. And I also wanted to touch on when you talked about doing the work, and this is, I'm going to sound judgy for clients, but it is fascinating to me when I do a lot of couples work, and I'm a big emotionally focused therapy, EFT. We've covered that on your show even. And when there's a book or two that really lay it out, and and I like I'm so worried about sounding judgy. Listen to this. I can't even do it on a podcast at times, right? But I feel like that's the thing where people will often say they won't read the book. I mean, there's a book called Hold Me Tight by Sue Johnson, the founder of EFT, that lays this stuff out so beautifully. And I have people saying, yeah, we didn't get to it, but we've been fighting like cats and dogs. Another week goes down and we haven't listened to any of the EFT podcasts, but man, it's been a rough week. And that's the part where sometimes it's difficult to just say, okay, well, what are you doing?
Yes. And why are you paying me?
Right.
It's like, I
Exactly.
want to help you, but if you're just showing up here once a week, like you have to do the work. If you want to get a return on your investment, I can help coach you through this if you're
Exactly.
doing the work.
Right. So, but again, the part of me though knows that everybody, based on their own, what we call private experiences, is that some people do need to just be able to make the appointment and to come in. Like I can understand that as well. And so,
Hmm.
but in a perfect world, if they want to accelerate the process, uh,
Yes.
be ready to do the work.
Yes.
Right.
And do whatever it takes, like get the support that you need to do the work. If you recognize that you're in a really hard place
Yeah.
emotionally and you need the help, then be open with the people in your life and say, "Hey, it's hard." I remember now it's so easy for me to say. Like I
Right.
go to a counselor, I see a therapist, it's nothing to me but initially it was so hard to admit. I felt ashamed, and But to say to a friend of mine, that same friend actually who had approached me, I told her a little bit about my experience, and then, or I came clean about what I was dealing with and said, I found a counselor and I need someone to watch Noah once a week for me to go. And Noah was one. And she's like, I can totally do that for you. But because that could have been a reason for me to not go, is it wasn't easy to go by any means. Like, my husband was a resident. We were really tight financially. I didn't have his help or support with Noah because he was working crazy hours. And I had to ask someone to do that for me because I recognized how much I needed it.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, going into this modality, I love acceptance and commitment therapy. If that goal is to get help, which you needed, then those, even the financial piece or the child care, or these become these stories my brain is trying to fuse to kind of go path of least resistance, because that's scary, or it's hard, or it's difficult to make those appointments, or to put out the finances, or to make that commitment. And our brain really does want path of least resistance, even though it doesn't like maybe where it's at. This is what it knows. And so I feel like, I think it's important to recognize that we can come up with reasons. It's a nice way of saying excuses in acceptance and commitment therapy, but we can come up with reasons, a lot of reasons, that therapy can be a challenge or difficult, or that it can just be really hard to commit to. But we're not even debating if those stories, those reasons, are true or false. Are they productive thoughts toward the goal of getting help? And so I love that you're laying that out there.
Yeah.
So what else? I mean, so when you talk about that part where, running out of things to talk about. So now, I mean, do you feel like you knew, or you would know when that would happen? And I'm curious what the client experience is like. I know what that's like as a therapist. I really do. And at times, I'm the one saying, I think that we're probably good. And every now and again, you'll have somebody that will say, well, no, because you realize, wow, this is something for them, that they don't want to give it.
They're kind of dependent on it.
Yeah.
For me, I started to kind of dread the appointments because I felt the awkwardness of the silences and stuff. And I just realized, it felt hard. I almost worried that like it would hurt her to say, I think we're done.
Yeah.
But in all the experiences, the two experiences that I've had where I said, okay, I'm ready, they're just thrilled for you, and they wanted to help you heal, and they were a piece of that, and they're thrilled for you to go out and try it. And like in my case, I was good for about a year, and then I started to recognize some of those same patterns creeping back in, which is so common and not shameful. It's like, of course, when your life circumstances change, some of your old habits are going to come creeping back in. And the strongest, best thing you can do is reach out for help again. And I was in a new place, so I reached out to a new therapist. But honestly, even if I was still living in Denver, I probably would have tried someone new. I just was ready for a new perspective on the problem. I felt like I'd gotten what I could get, which was a ton from my first counselor, and I was ready kind of for a new take. And I found her, my second counselor, on a recommendation from a friend. So I'd gotten a little bit braver by that time about talking openly about mental health stuff. And so I just asked a couple of my girlfriends from church if anybody saw a counselor, if they knew anybody good, and just kind of admitted I'm struggling a little bit. And one of my friends had a recommendation of someone that she saw, and I went to her as well. And her personality was really different. She was really like a red personality, say it how it is.
Okay.
And I think that if I had gone to her first, it would have totally scarred me. I wouldn't have been ready, but I was ready the second time to kind of hear her tell me some hard truths that I needed to hear.
Yeah.
And it was great.
So what was that like though? Do you remember some of the things that were difficult about that therapy?
Oh yeah. In the very first appointment I had with her, a lot of times therapists have you kind of tell your story.
Right.
And where you're at and where the issues came from. And that's you kind of hate to do it each time you start with someone new and you go through it all. And I was telling her about how I grew up with a mom who had breast cancer, who was diagnosed when I was 6, and she passed away when I was 19. And I was telling her about that. And she said, "Oh, I see what's going on. You have a savior complex."
Whoa.
And I was like, excuse me? Like, it was just so abrupt. And like
This
I
was
was
session one? Was this session one?
session one.
Okay.
And I was expecting her to be more empathetic and
Sure.
compassionate and more like my first counselor, who was kind of like an earth mama hippie, the
Yeah.
first lady. And I was like, excuse me? Like, what does that even mean? And she said, you wanted to be the savior. Like, you grew up with this, a mom who was ill, and you wanted to take care of her and save her. And so you did. You wanted to do everything right. And that's, where your perfectionism comes from. And I at first was like, oh my gosh, I don't like you. Like,
Right.
I don't like to hear that about myself. So I don't like you and you're wrong. And I was defensive for my mom too, because I'm like, my mom never played the victim card, which is true. And
Yeah.
she's like, no, I'm not saying she played that card. I'm saying those are the roles life casts you in. Like, when you have terminal cancer, you are a victim and the people around you want to save you. Like, that's just the way it goes,
Yeah.
So I went home not knowing what to think, but because I was ready and willing and thought about it, I thought, I have a savior complex. Like, her honesty, I could immediately see that it was true. As much as I didn't want to see that it was true,
Yeah.
it was true. And so I went back just willing and like, okay, let's talk about this. Let's learn. I want to know. And it's been so helpful for me to have that insight into myself in the years since, because it comes up sometimes, this savior complex, and I can spot it right away because she pointed it out to me, and I know now kind of how to temper it
Yeah.
and what to do with it. Because as Jennifer Finlayson Fife says, you can't fix what you can't see. And it took her pointing out to me what I couldn't see, and it's been so helpful.
Well, and I love that concept of, as a therapist, and I try to avoid cliches as often as I can, but one of them that I go back to often is that you don't know what you don't know. And so a lot of times that's what you really are paying for, is to hopefully find someone that does have some experience in the chair, and they maybe have dealt with some of those kind of situations.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that can be liberating, but I like that you had to go through that first therapist experience to even, I don't know, to be able to have that second experience and to kind of be ready, right?
Yes, absolutely. I was so like emotionally vulnerable going into the first experience that probably would have just destroyed
Right.
me. I wouldn't have even heard it. I would have just said, I'm not coming back to you, but I was stronger and more ready the second time. And again, it was a good match. It was a good time for me. And I worked with her for about 9 months as well and learned so much from her. And then again, kind of stopped having stuff to talk about, and I was good. And so we stopped.
I love and I really enjoy this kind of back and forth, right? The client therapist thing that we're doing, even, and I know as a therapist, there are times where I will feel like I made a pretty good point, and I realized, wow, I didn't really get much of a reaction there. That was a pretty good one. And realizing that there are times where somebody's not necessarily in a position to hear, or and I'm not saying that I always have all the right answers, but I like that, what you said there was you needed to be in a position to hear that.
Yes.
And I also, before we get too far away from this as well, it's perfectly okay to break up with your therapist after you have met your treatment goals. As a matter of fact, that's, as therapists, we love to be broken up on.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, that's the whole point, right?
Right,
You want
exactly.
to eventually be broken up on.
Exactly, which is kind of an interesting relationship. That's our goal.
Yeah.
When we have met our goals, you will break up with me, and it will be a joyous occasion.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, hey, tell me about do you want to kind of move into the what it's been like to find help for your son, and how that goes?
So I've had such a positive experience with therapy that when my son started struggling, he's always had really, really big emotions. It's his personality, but he's adopted. And the more that I learn about adoption, the more I realize that he was adopted at birth. I was in the delivery room, but that is a loss. Like, he lost his birth mother. That was a separation and a loss that I think affects him and plays into his big, big emotions. And then he actually lost his birth mother. She passed away when he was 6. And so I feel like around that time, and he's so little that it's hard to know what all he what he takes in, how it's affecting him emotionally, all of that. But his big emotions got taken to kind of a new level around that same time. And I just thought, okay, I've seen how helpful counseling is. Let's just
Yeah.
get him into a counselor. Again, didn't really know where to start with
Yeah.
that. And so I asked
It can
the
be hard too, because, I know as a, when I was doing my practicum in grad school, I worked at a child abuse prevention council, a nonprofit clinic, but I didn't even realize at that time. I mean, I knew I wanted to work with men. And so I felt bad that kids weren't necessarily my specialty, and I had kids. And so I appreciate that you really do have to look for something completely different, don't you?
Yes. And you want somebody that works with children. You
Yeah.
want
That's
it
a
to be
passion.
different.
Yeah.
Yes. And has training in
Yes.
working with children.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I asked the pediatrician, we live in a really small town, and she didn't really have a lot of ideas for me, which is just discouraging. But that's something else that I always advise people is ask your doctor or ask your child's doctor if they have any suggestions. Ask your church leaders if they know of anybody, like a teacher, people who are in the field where they might have heard of or worked with families that have had counselors. Just ask around. And so I asked some other moms from the school, and one of that I trusted who had similarly kind of spirited children. I knew that.
I like
And
the concept.
she
Spirited children.
yes, she recommended this counselor here in town because I could have driven to the bigger city, but it's like an hour and a half each way. And so obviously I wanted somebody here, and she recommended someone, and I called her, and I just wanted to make sure, like, do you actually specialize in working with children? Or she's like, yes, like come into my office and you'll see. And so I brought in my son, and the first appointment I stayed in there, and I just sat on the couch totally quietly and filled out paperwork, but like he knew I was in there. But she was right. When I came into her office, I could see like it's set up for children. There's like a little play table and all these toys, and the whole session they color and they do toys together and they talk. And he just really loves her, and
Oh,
that's been so great to see his relationship with her, and just to know that there's other adults in my child's life that love him and see the best in him and trust him, and that he trusts,
yeah.
has been a huge blessing. And the way that I described it to him, because I didn't know how to explain counseling to him, and I definitely didn't want him to think there was something wrong with him,
Right.
and that's why
Yeah.
he was going in. Or and so I told him that I'd found him an emotions teacher. That's what I
Oh,
called her.
I like that.
And I said, you go to school and your teachers teach you all about math and reading, but they don't really teach you what to do with your emotions. And I said, I've always had really big emotions. I like mine are different than his, but I've always been really sensitive, big emotions that way my whole life. And he knows that. And we've talked about that. And I said, and I didn't know what to do with those until I was well into my adulthood. And I wish I would have had an emotions teacher. And so that's why I found one for you. And he was kind of like, okay, like he was open to it, but also kind of like, I don't know. But
Right.
then after he started going to her, he just loves her. And at first he saw her more frequently when he was kind of in the throes of right after he'd lost his birth mom. But now he sees her about once a month. Again, it's kind of like a maintenance
Yeah.
check-in,
Sure.
and he loves it. And what's funny is that my daughter, who's 5, says, like, when do I get to start going to an emotions teacher? And I'm like, well, maybe in a few years you'll be at the emotions teacher too. So
I love that. And I love a couple of concepts too, where did you ever feel threatened that here's this other person that my son is bonding with? Or
no, but I also feel like it's because of the work I've done.
good.
Because I've been to counseling, because I've done a lot of work around adoption, I don't feel possessive over my
Yeah.
children in the same way that others might, because I just have really learned that they're not mine. Like
Yeah.
they're God's,
Yeah.
and whatever I need to do to help them get support, I'm okay with. Like I've just learned that love is not like finite and limited, and it doesn't need to be possessed. Like there's enough to go around. And so but I can see how that would be weird and hard. And I will say that sometimes it's interesting to me and a little hard that like she may know some things that I don't even know.
Right. No, exactly. Yeah.
And he may open up and talk to her about things that I don't even know. And sometimes that's like, but I also know that my son, who is extremely emotionally intelligent and reads me like a book, he isn't going to tell me things that he knows might hurt me.
Mm.
And like, so I want him to have a place that he can tell an adult that I trust and that he trusts and get that out. And one thing is that I do meet with her without him.
Right.
So like every few appointments I go in and she's never broken his trust. I mean, if there was some big, huge issue that I needed to know about, she would tell me.
Right.
But as far as just the little things that he trusts her with or talks to her about, she would never break his trust, which I love. But she also kind of can give me some insight into how he's doing. And she gives me parenting advice based on, she knows him.
Yeah.
Which is better than just like some guru on Instagram who can give you kind of like really good, but general parenting advice. She's like, no, for Noah, this is what I would suggest. And these are some scripts you can use. And this is what I'm seeing and what I recommend, which has been really helpful.
So, and I love the Instagram guru stuff as well. Like that's brilliant because our kids are individuals, and I still do a fair amount of counseling with teenagers. And a couple of things that you said. So I was kind of leading you, and you answered that question more beautifully than I could have answered it.
Oh, good.
But I feel like there are parents who will say, "Is this bad?" But I worry. I don't want my teen or my kid to feel like they want to turn to someone else. And I kind of acknowledge, or I can normalize that fear, that worry, but ultimately we just want them to feel like they have somebody or that they can open up to. And a lot of times that will cause, and I want any parent listening to know that when your kid or teenager does feel like they have a safe place where they can kind of process things, a lot of times the result of that is that then they can come to you because they don't feel like what's wrong with me. They haven't just had those things rattle around in their head and trying to figure those things out on their own. And I feel like that's one of the things that I just absolutely love is it can actually increase that relationship between child and parent. And I see that happen often.
And I feel like she's teaching him how
Yes.
to talk about his emotions. And so he has more skills to talk to me about them. And it's just really brought us closer that he has. And it's not just her. It's very important to me that my kids have a lot of different adults in their life that I trust and they trust that can support them.
Well, and I'm grateful you brought this up too, Rachel. When I see a teenager, so confidentiality is technically still held between the therapist and the parent if they're a minor, but I'll always bring the parent in and say, hey, are you okay? You know, if I have confidentiality with your son or daughter, but just know that if there is anything that's really big, then we're either going to bring this to you together, or he or she is going to allow me to kind of present this to you, or maybe they'll even kind of come to you on their own. And I feel like that's a real powerful thing to establish up front so that a parent knows that, okay, if something really is kind of scary going on there, the therapist and my son or daughter are still, we're going to deal with it. I'm not going to be completely in the dark. And I feel like that's one of those where when I have run into some of those scary things, I can honestly say I've never run into a situation where when the teenager feels heard, maybe by me, that they don't feel that like they can bring it to their parent, whether it's with with me there or, so, I mean, I just think that's important for a parent to hear that in so many ways, this is good to have your kid or teenager see somebody if you really feel like that will help them.
Yes. And she's given me so many tools for Noah. He's a big spirited personality. And when I first brought him in, I asked her, I'm like, does he have something diagnosable? Like, do I need to? And she, after meeting with him, she said, I've learned this little equation. She said, Q plus S equals D. She said, quirk plus stress equals disorder, or the appearance of a disorder. Funny. It's not really, but if you have a kid that has kind of some quirks and then they are under stress, it will start to appear that they have a disorder or a syndrome of some kind. And so what the real test for that is, take the stress off. And if you still see the problem, then maybe there is something you need to go talk to a doctor about. But she's like, in his case, I really think that like simplifying his routine.
Mm-hmm.
It was stress in his like environment and routines and too much stimulation. And she's like, I think you're going to see a lot of these behaviors calm down. You're not crazy to think like maybe there's something,
Sure.
but she's like, my opinion after seeing a lot of kids is this is just a kid with a big personality who's under stress right now. And
Sure.
let's reduce the stress and then we'll see. So I always like think about that little equation
That's really good.
when trying to decide kind of what to do for my kids.
I love that, because if a kid has a tiny bit of impulsivity and then they get stressed, then it's going to look like raging ADHD, right? But then on the weekend, you
Yes.
get them to move off the couch, and you're like, where'd that ADHD go? When
Yes.
no stressors, because there isn't the school or the friends pressure or that sort of thing. I like that. I like that formula quite a bit.
Yeah.
Are there other things? You had a quote here that I really liked as well. The one about it'll get easier. This is
Oh
really,
yeah.
tell me about
Yeah.
that. Tell me about that.
So one thing that she has taught me to tell Noah, so that's been so great, is she gives me words to
Mm,
explain like what she sees kids like Noah in her office all the time. So she has words for it. And so she said, because with my Noah, he has like really big reactions to things. He gets super angry, he hits or whatever,
mm,
and then he feels so bad about it. And it turns into like he hates himself. It turns into, and then he'll say things that are awful, like that
mm.
he wants to hurt himself or
Sure.
that. And that was what initially scared me so much, that he was saying these things about himself. So she taught me to tell him, because he's emotionally intelligent, he recognizes that he made a bad choice. He doesn't want to hurt people. He doesn't, but then he internalizes it and thinks
Yeah.
he's bad. So she taught me to tell him that you're little, she always says, you're little. And when you're little, your brain can't always control your body. Like your rational brain is telling you, I don't want to hit, I don't want to yell, that's not right. But your body is so angry and feels so many things that sometimes your body wins,
Mm,
and you lash out and you do something that you don't want to do and you feel so sad about it. But she's like, as you get older, your brain is going to start winning, and it's going to get easier to for your body to listen to your brain, and your brain's going to get stronger, and we're going to work on skills so that you can control how your body's feeling and your brain can talk to your body. But she just tells me to emphasize and tell him it will get easier, because she's like, for a kid like him, it can feel hopeless, like I'm never going to improve, I'm never going to get better. She's like, just always tell him when he makes a mistake, like, you're going to do better next time. It's going to get easier. You're going to get better at this because we're going to work at it.
I love it. That is, and that's a good advice for the us adults as well.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Rachel, I think have we gone 30 minutes or so? I think this might be the most compact podcast I've ever done in my entire life. What an honor from the master herself, 3 and 30. So boy, I should have had you come up with the takeaways.
I know. I know. We could have done that, but we didn't this time around. I
It's
think we
okay.
did that no, we didn't last time I was on your show either.
No.
We're going to have to do that
I
sometime.
thought about it many times, though. That is, I really enjoy your model quite a
Oh,
bit.
thank you.
All right. So, any kind of last thoughts? I mean, about just I know that the stigma of therapy is getting lessened, but that doesn't mean that it's completely gone. I think I've spoken at 3 or 4 events here locally, and they've all been on talking more about mental health. And so I love that. But even when you're there in front of a crowd, it's pretty fascinating to just watch the faces of people that, that some are just paying so much attention, and others, I feel like they almost feel shame in the room, in the audience listening. And so I don't know, any other thoughts on how we get the destigmatize therapy, counseling?
I think how to destigmatize it. I think people who have been through mental health challenges and have been to counseling, and I think we really have a responsibility to talk openly about it, because that really helps to destigmatize it. I know that was huge for me because I have an older sister that has really struggled with mental illness, and so I knew that I respected her. So when I thought, like, does this make me weak? Does this make me, I could combat that and think like, no, because look at how much you respect Sarah and how strong she is. And she's gotten help, and you're allowed to get help too. And so if we can be open with our experiences, then maybe someone else will look and say, well, Rachel doesn't seem completely nuts and she goes to therapy, you know?
Yeah.
And so then that gives them permission to do it as well. And I would really encourage anybody, if you're listening and you're thinking, I probably need this, like I probably need therapy or counseling, to get to do it, to just give it
Yes.
a try, and don't let those barriers stop you, like you talked about, with it being inconvenient or expensive, or like do whatever it takes to try to get that help. And another tip that I often tell women is write like a journal entry on a really hard, low day.
Yeah.
Write out what you're thinking and what you're feeling, because and call the counselor.
Yeah.
Because then when you go into counseling a couple weeks later, you may be telling yourself, I don't know why I'm here. This isn't that bad.
Yes. Yes.
I feel dumb. Like what? Read the journal entry and remember how much you need this and believe that. And that's true too for if you want to talk to your doctor about it. I think a
Yeah.
lot of women, they get in there and they downplay it, and they almost feel like they downplay it to themselves too. Like they're like, maybe I didn't actually feel that low. But if you have it written down, you can remember, and you can even show the doctor and say, this is what it's like on my really low day. And then that helps people sometimes get taken more seriously.
There is
They're
nothing I love
asking for help.
more than when people do pull out their notes. I have to tell you, honestly, I love that. I really do. And I do want to just echo, and here's why I feel like my podcast can go on so long, because I feel like we could even just talk about just more things and just more and more things about to watch out for that will help destigmatize or bring people into therapy. But I feel like what you just said about when people talk about going to therapy, as a therapist, I will tell you, I hear often, I mean, weekly, people that when I say what brought you into counseling, which is again one of those questions on the intake, it is someone that I know, someone that I love or care about goes to therapy, and I know that it's worked for them. And I mean, I hear that all the time. So I promise you, if you are talking about it, then there are going to be people who will benefit from that. I mean, and that's
Yeah.
so I'm grateful that you shared that. I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're not sure, if you are someone that feels like you might need therapy, but you're not sure who to ask for a recommendation, if you can think of anybody that has ever mentioned in passing
Yes.
that they see a therapist or they take an antidepressant, or even if it's someone you barely know, that is a sign that that is a safe person that will talk to you. And so even if you hardly know them, send them a text, approach them and say, hey, do you have a recommendation? Because I could use some help. I promise you they will talk to you about it.
Perfect. Rachel Nielson, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on
Can't wait to
again.
have you on
Second
again.
time.
Right? Can't wait for number 3.
Yeah,
All right,
we'll do 3 takeaways next time.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to hit stop. Hang on just a second.